Hey there folks, Tim Slade here, and welcome back to the ATD Ask a Trainer video series. In today's episode, my special guest Kevin Thorn and I are answering your questions about storyboarding for e-learning. So stick around. When you're starting work on a new e-learning project, you may wonder whether or not it's worth the time and energy to draft and review a storyboard with your stakeholders and subject matter experts, or if you should just jump straight into development. And of course, even if you do decide to start with a storyboard, that leads to other questions about whether you should use a written storyboard or a visual storyboard, or what exactly needs to be included in a storyboard in the first place. And well, for all of those reasons, that's why I decided to invite Kevin Thorn to join me and help me tackle your questions about all things storyboarding for e-learning. So let's get to it. Hey, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me for this month's ATD Ask a Trainer. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for inviting me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who don't know you, can you take a moment to introduce yourself? Tell us what you do for a living, a little bit about your business, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, sure. Kevin Thorn, been around for a number of years, retired Army, and then I went to the corporate world, basically where I cut my teeth, like most of us, accidental instructional designers, ended up in this industry.
Yeah.
Did that for another, about 10, 15 years, and then similar to your path, was freelancing on the side, and then freelancing started to be another full-time job, and one had to go. So I started Nugget Head Studios about 10 years ago, 2012. So we're about 9.5 years in. And it's a custom e-learning design and development. So I do a lot of training too. So I'll train Storyline and Camtasia and the softwares that we use. But largely, it's just custom one-off e-learning designs or training programs. I teach universities, so I also teach grad students of instructional design. And I'm an illustrator, artist too, so I'm quite involved in comics, instructional comics, and using the comic medium for instruction, for serious instruction, serious comics, I guess we call it. Yeah. And lastly, I don't know what I was thinking, but I went ahead and started a doctoral program last fall.
Oh, wow.
And
good for
my
you.
Research is instructional comics in the adult workforce. So we'll see
I love that.
How that goes. But that's my world and where I've been and where I'm going.
Yeah, well, good. Well, one of the things we've known each other for years and years and years. I think the first time I spoke at a conference was in 2013 when I was working for Diane Elkins. And that's probably how, because I know you've done some work for her in the past. That's probably how we met each other.
Exactly.
At one of those conferences in Orlando or Vegas or somewhere like that.
I don't remember.
Yeah. But, one of the things I've always liked about you is that you are one of those people that likes to work out loud, and you always share, whether you're sketching something or doing a storyboard online, you like to put it out there. And so when I thought about this episode on storyboarding, I thought, oh, yeah, we have to have Kevin because you're always sharing your storyboards and what you're doing online, and I appreciate that. All right, so before we get to the questions about storyboarding for e-learning, I'd love for you real quickly, Kevin, if you can, for those who aren't familiar with what a storyboard is, can you give a quick definition of how you define what an e-learning storyboard is, and then we'll tackle some of the questions we received?
The simple answer, in our industry, a storyboard is a blueprint. It's the documentation of all of the bells and whistles and behaviors and content and narration and all of the things that are going to go into the development phase. It's your blueprint. It's just a recording of how to put it together.
Yeah, I love that analogy. I use that one all the time because I always tell people, you don't just go, if you were building a house, you wouldn't just go to Home Depot and grab wood and nails and start building a house. You need to know how many bedrooms it's going to have. Is it 1-story or 2-story? And just like you would always create a blueprint before building a house, you would do the same thing for an e-learning course. Why wouldn't you?
Adding
right?
to that, really, let's play with that blueprint analogy.
Yeah.
If the client, subject matter expert, stakeholders are the homeowner, the architect that they hire is the instructional designer. You work together to design the house. The architect then documents that design in a set of blueprints, and then hands that set of blueprints off to a contractor, in this case, the developer. Now, in our world, we could be both the same person.
Sure. Yep.
But in the traditional sense of home building, if you were to go to a job site where there's a new house being built, very rarely you're going to see an architect on that job site.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
the idea then, if you take that analogy, your storyboard should be all of the details necessary to build that e-learning without the instructional designer present. So you should have all the directions, everything you need. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen all the time, but if you kind of follow that analogy, that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, I agree. I call that development ready storyboard, and I think and the reason why, and we'll get into this with some of the questions, but the reason why you want to do a storyboard, just like an architect would do a blueprint for a house, is if somebody wants to move the kitchen, you don't want to wait until you've built the house to realize you want to move the kitchen. That means rebuilding the house. And the same thing I think applies to e-learning.
Sure
is
does.
that you want to do a storyboard, because if they change their mind, it might mean rebuilding the course, right? It's easy to change things when it's on paper.
Missing deadlines and more money and all that kind of thing. Sure.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, now that we got that out of the way, we have a kind of a general understanding of what a storyboard is. Let's get to some of our questions that we've received on storyboarding. So our first question comes from Brittany Osborne. Hey, Brittany. And Brittany wants to know, when does it make sense to draft a storyboard versus just jumping straight into rapid prototyping? I love this question because it's never ceases to amaze me. Whenever people are new to e-learning, they always are skeptical about the value of doing a storyboard. They just want to jump straight into development. What are your thoughts on storyboarding versus rapid prototyping?
Well,
Kevin?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is the semantics about the different terminology we're using.
Yeah.
Storyboard is a term used in different industries. In different industries, it means something different. And whether you're storyboarding a film or storyboarding animation or storyboarding a commercial or storyboarding e-learning.
Mm-hmm.
And then whether we call it storyboarding or not, the web industry calls it wireframing. Mobile apps, they call it prototyping. It's essentially the same thing. You're designing a product that you're going to end up developing. So let's just agree that storyboard in this industry, in this sake of this conversation, it's a document of, like you said, development ready document, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to confuse storyboarding with prototyping. I believe those are that's apples and oranges.
Yeah.
Storyboard is the design. It's the documentation of the design. And let's just play this out for a minute, Brittany. Let's say I have an interaction that my subject matter expert wants some kind of engaging interaction, some kind of example, exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we can design it. We can script it out in the storyboard. Say, this is the goal. This is the objective. Here's the content for it. We might have a little narration. Here are some visual ideas that we might want to do. Now I can document that, but I don't know how to develop it yet, because then we would go to prototype. We would prototype that one interaction. We get some feedback back and forth and say, yeah, let's try that. So once we nail that prototype down, that it fits, then we come back to the storyboard and we'll document a few more details and or refer to this prototype file that we practiced or we played with. And then when it comes to development, then we'll pull that prototype in and then fine tune it and polish it up. So that's a great question, because I think the same thing. I was just in a conversation with one of my students earlier this morning, actually, having a real hard time with the design side of storyboarding. So it's almost like I asked him, I said, just put everything, I need you to go prototype. I need you to go play around and put it together so you can see the behaviors.
Yeah.
What happens when a learner does this? And then what behaviors happen? And then are there 2 behaviors? Are there 3 behaviors? Are there conditions tied to it? All of those things. If you got a really seasoned, experienced developer, they don't need a whole lot of direction.
Right.
But if you have a storyboard that you're collaborating with somebody else on the other side, then you got to be a little bit, you don't have to be, but it's helpful to be a little bit more detailed. So Brittany, I hope that answers your question. In my view, in the world I work in, storyboarding and prototype are 2 different desks.
Yeah, I I agree with that. And I think, for me, when I was new to e-learning, storyboarding, and I still say this to folks, I think storyboarding is, out of all of the different phases you go through in e-learning development, it's the hardest part, because you're having to take what is a visual interactive medium and document it in words. And that means writing and describing every word that's going to be on the screen, every action that's going to take place. And I think it requires you to really go through and mentally answer the question of everything that's going to happen in that course. And I think that's a challenge for some folks.
Actually, it's my favorite part.
Yeah.
Well, because in my mind, even I storyboard for myself. My storyboards are extremely detailed, even for myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's always like I'm playing like this little internal game with me. Because if I were to take this storyboard or set of documents within the storyboard and I give them to Tim, in my mind, I want to see, can Tim go build this without asking me a question? If he asks me, what does this mean? Or how does this work? Or where does this, then I'm not doing my job as a good storyboarder.
Yep. Yeah, I say the same thing with my students whenever I review one of their storyboards. If I can envision it in my mind's eye of what's going to happen, then I feel like it has enough detail. And you're right. If I can develop it without questions, then you're on the right track. Good. All right. Thank you, Brittany, for that question. Hopefully that gives you a little insight there. All right. So our next question comes from Christopher Taylor. Christopher wants to know, what tools should I be using to create my e-learning storyboard? Or my e-learning storyboards. I love your take on this, Kevin. I always tell people, use whatever tool you're most comfortable using. Some people use Word. I see some people use PowerPoint. I've seen some people even use Microsoft Excel because they like how it's a table. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that one, Kevin? What tools should people use?
I'm with you the same way. There was a period, even now, there's a lot of cloud-based collaborative tools now. Miro comes to mind as one of them.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, Google Drive and all the cloud-based tools that Google offers. But to your point, so a lot of times what I'll do is I'm flexible. I'll use whatever tool my clients are already using. If they're using Miro, we'll jump in there. If they're using idea.io, we'll use that. If they're using Google Drive, we'll use that. And I've got, I say those three because I've got clients using those three right now.
Yeah.
But when it comes, and I had to remind, I was actually in an ATD chapter meeting. I don't remember which city it was, but I was sitting there, and I think it had something to do with storyboarding. And the gentleman sitting next to me asked me, he said, "Hey, did you see this new storyboarding tool?" And he showed me on his iPad. And I said, "Oh, yeah, let me look at that." And I looked at it. I said, he says, "What tools do you use?" I said, I can't keep up with the next flavor of storyboarding app or tool that comes out. One, I've got to learn the tool. Does it fit with my workflow?
Yeah.
And more importantly, can my clients access that tool? Do they need to create a login? Do they need to create an account? And if they're behind a firewall, then that just causes more problems. So, Christopher, Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, and Excel are my go-to tools. And in fact, Word is the main document. But the chat, and I don't know if it's kind of a follow-on answer to this, but the Word is difficult for a lot of stakeholders that are kind of new to e-learning because it's in a vertical portrait sort of direction.
Right.
And if you're doing a linear course, it's fine. It'll work fine. But if you're doing something a little bit more branching or complex, it's really difficult for them to see where things branch up and down in a vertical document. So that's when I use PowerPoint, and then I create a visual map. Think of Visio or something like a flowchart kind of thing, where there's these buckets of information that line up with the main storyboard. And then I can use those two documents to manage the expectations of what's going to happen here. Well, we can go prototype that little bucket, but let's make sure we got the flow and the navigation and the branching and all that work. So, Christopher, don't overthink it. Word and PowerPoint are your friends. Everybody has access to them. If it's a Google thing, you can upload them to Google, convert them over to collaborative documents to where people can comment on them. Even now, matter of fact, storyboards I'm working on now with a client, international client, we're using Dropbox, where you can add comments and stuff in Dropbox now and get alerts and notification when somebody's making edits or changes to the document. So we have the technology now a heck of a lot better than we did 10 years ago when I first started. I mean, Word and PowerPoint was still there, but being able to collaborate on those together, we've got a lot more flexibility. So I wouldn't, Christopher, again, I wouldn't overthink it. Use those until you get really good and real comfortable with what you're doing. And then if you want to branch out to some of the fancier tools, then.
Yeah. I've been using Google Docs more and more recently. I mean, I'm a big fan of anything that allows for tracking changes and comments, and but I like Google Docs because you can collaborate in real time versus having a file you have to send back and forth. So, all right, good. Thanks for that one, Christopher. All right. So our next question comes from, and I apologize in advance if I'm going to mispronounce your name, Anu Gopu. Anu wants to know how much detail should be included in my storyboards. We kind of tackled this one earlier, but maybe if you could give some examples, Kevin, of what that means to create a development-ready storyboard. What are your thoughts
this
there?
might throw some people off, but the amount of detail is enough detail. The first draft of your storyboard should help carry that conversation with your subject matter expert, your stakeholders, right? Your clients, customers. Yep. So that's any, depending on what tool you use, like I use Storyline. So there's a Storyline speak, there's a Storyline language. Yep. Yep. Captivate has its own language, that sort of thing. So I've created a syntax and a naming convention that when I write my storyboards, it communicates with Storyline. So if you're a Storyline developer, you can look at my storyboard and say, oh, I know exactly what this means, or I know how.
So you'll reference like a slide layer popping up or
exactly
a state change, right? Yeah, okay.
And then I've got some other syntax that I've used, and maybe some other day we can talk about how to do all that. But a general description of what the learner is going to see, narration, obviously script that you might have, any media notes that the developer, or you need to remind yourself, hey, don't forget, this also has a video that has to play after the narration starts, something like that. And then, of course, your location numbering convention, what screen is this, what screen is that sort of thing. And a title, right? Make sure you name all of them. Yeah. At a fundamental level, that's all you need to get started. But what I do is I have what I call companion documents. I don't put everything in the main storyboard. The main storyboard is just to get my stakeholders so we have all the content laid out, we got it organized, we know where everything lives. And then, for instance, like a knowledge check or a quiz or something, I'll storyboard that in a second document. Because let's think about a simple multiple choice question.
Yeah.
You have the question statement, you have four choices. You have feedback, correct feedback, incorrect feedback. You also might have multiple attempts, but then you have a third level of feedback. Yep. That's a lot of different locations where content lives, and there might be images and video and other audio involved with that. And to put all that in one screen on a main document, storyboard, it could be overwhelming and intimidating for somebody that's not used to reading these types of documents.
For sure.
So I'll break that out into its own document. And then in the actual main storyboard, I'll refer or link to that other document. So if the knowledge check goes here, here's a link to the document that has all the details on how to build that.
Yep.
There's other advantages of that too, because if I have extra developers working with me, take this document and go build the knowledge check. And then somebody else can use the main storyboard and work on it. So those types of things I keep separate. Some of the more complex interactions that involve, maybe some branching scenario with a lot of video, a lot of detail around the video that you need and stuff like that. So that's just my approach. But Anu, going back to your original question of how much detail, the amount of detail that goes in your storyboards is at the very where the conversation of your customers and you meet, and there's no confusion. Yeah. If you got too much in there where they're asking a lot of questions, maybe that's overwhelming them too much too soon. If they're asking a lot of questions about what they don't see, maybe there's not enough detail. Yeah. So it's just trying to find that balance between what works with you and the type of customers that you typically work with.
I think that makes sense. The biggest area of opportunity I see when I review a storyboard is when somebody will say there's a button on the screen, and when they click the button, additional content about X, Y, or Z will be revealed. And I always challenge. I go, okay, well, what does the button say? Like, what's literally on the button? And then when content's revealed, well, what does that say? What does that mean that content's revealed? Like, if I'm a reviewer, I need to know what that content is. What does it say? Is there audio, and what does that audio say? Or is there on-screen text? And so I think for some people they just get overwhelmed with or they don't realize the level of granularity that has to go into a storyboard, and not just for development purposes, but also just for a subject matter expert or a reviewer to be able to effectively review it.
Well, I don't know if this will help in that, but every screen, every real estate, it may not be
Mm-hmm.
you might not be changing screens, but like you said, if you click a button and new information comes on, that's a new layer of real estate.
Yeah.
So every new piece of real estate that's in the course is its own table in Word document.
Right.
So I keep all the tables separate. That way, if I need to insert one, I can move tables around. And if I have, let's say, a screen with 4 buttons, and this is a syntax thing, what I use is the bracket, not the parentheses, but the brackets. Mm-hmm. So I'll put a bracket and then the label that goes on the button, and then the bracket. So that's a syntax of how do you write a button label. So that goes on, and then right next to that, it has the location. So if this screen is say 2.1, then I'll have the button label, and next to the button label, 2.1.1 or 2.1.2. There's another table, and that's the other piece of real estate that will come up over top of that. And I have the very first page of my storyboards have how to read this storyboard. Yeah. Got all the details and the syntax. What is a button? What is this? What is that? What is a cue point?
Right.
So, and that's a process, Anu. You just kind of go through. If you're working with the same type of subject matter experts all the time, then you have a language, you have a relationship, you have a communication that you can work with. And then a lot of times there's acronyms and different things within inside that organization that you can then apply to your document, so that basically you're speaking to them, so they're more comfortable with reading these documents. If it's someone like me, where they're all over the place, all agencies, international, nonprofit, government, military, and everybody has a different way of doing things. Yeah. I'm working with a government one right now, and they have 2 storyboards. They call one the micro and one the macro. Look at the micro document, look at the macro document. I'm not going to try to change their syntax. They're comfortable with that, and I can flex and adjust to that.
Yeah. Good. All right. Thank you, Anu. Okay, so our final question comes from Philip Deere. Hey, Philip. And Philip wants to know how much detail should be included in a rapid prototype. So I know we talked a little bit about prototyping earlier. And, I'm one of those people where I think the spectrum from storyboarding to prototyping, I think there is a gray area where if you're doing like a wireframe or a visual storyboard, you're kind of almost getting into prototyping. But I don't know. How do you define prototype, and how much detail do you include in your prototypes?
Yeah, sure. So if there's some type of communication, kind of message that's involved with the prototype, I'll bring in some stock images or some, just some basic visuals. I don't get wrapped up in all of the visual design of it. In fact, when I teach Storyline, and I disclaimer right up front, this is not a visual design course. This is a development course, and we're using a development tool. So everything we do in here is going to be prototypey. So prototype is the functionality and the behavior, right? It's not about design, and it's not about visual design. I mean, it can be. That's the detail part, right? How much do you need to, Philip, it's how much detail do you need to put in the prototype in order for your subject matter expert to understand the direction you're going?
Right.
If they just see a basic prototype, it's like, when they click this is going to happen and this happens. I've got the functionality. I've got all the conditions figured out. I've got all the variables figured out. I've got the branching figured out. Let's talk through that and go through that. And if you know it's all there, but they're still having a hard time seeing that you might have to add a little bit more. Again, it goes back to a couple of the questions. Storyboarding is a process. It's not. There's no rules to this.
Right. Yeah.
work the process that fits within your team, within your organization, the people that you work with the most, and then you fine tune that process that works best. So the more detail you need in a prototype, if it works, and then scale it back until you don't, because it all comes down to time.
Right.
So if I can put a prototype together in 20 minutes, and then another one I put 2 hours into, which one work better? If the 20-minute prototype got the message across, we got a confirmation to go build it, or did I need to put 2 hours in to get that confirmation?
That makes sense. Yeah. I always tell people, that how much detail you or what you do with your prototype depends, I guess, on what you need to get out of it. So, for example, sometimes I'll do wireframe prototypes just to validate functionality, to make sure, can I do the thing that I think I want to do in Storyline or whatever tool I'm using? And I may never show that to a stakeholder or subject matter expert. I might just do it for my own validation.
Right? Yeah.
Or if I'm doing a visual prototype where I want to validate to my stakeholders and subject matter experts that I'm getting the branding properly,
Exactly.
I might just create essentially a template. It may not have content, it may not have functionality, but it's just showing the look and feel. And then the third type of prototype, this is the kind I typically do. I call it like an MVP prototype, where I'll take 4 to 6 slides from the storyboard, and I'll fully develop those functionality, look and feel, content, to validate the total learner experience. Because I've found that when you do sometimes when you do like a rough wireframe prototype, no matter how many times you tell your stakeholders and subject matter experts that, no, that's not really how the images are going to look, that's a placeholder graphic or that's a placeholder button, they inevitably ask if that's really how it's going to look.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Nobody's asked this question. You won't find any images in my storyboards. You won't find a single visual in my storyboard.
Mine's the same way.
I learned the hard way, because just what you pointed out, why is that sky a different color blue than the real sky is?
Yeah.
So don't, you remember the fuzzy thumb technique? I remember, who did that? Tom Kuhlman.
Okay.
The fuzzy thumb technique is when you have stakeholders that are zeroing in on things that have no relevance to the discussion, then deliberately put things in there to draw their attention to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he's like, oh yeah, that's fine. We'll take that out. That's an easy fix.
Yeah.
Give them some validation. Yeah. And I learned a long time ago that's just, you're losing time talking about things that are not relevant. So I take all the visuals out of the storyboards until we do, like you said, we'll do like a UI prototype.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the branding, the colors, what does all that look like? And again, project dictates on whether I got to build out a few slides in order to get the general learner experience put together.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm the same way. My storyboards are always written, and because at that moment in the development process, what I need from them is to review content and the flow of content and the accuracy of content. I don't want them getting stuck on, why am I using that shade of blue or that placeholder image. So
right.
All right. Good. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. I think that's all we got time for today. So, where can people find you online or on LinkedIn if they want to connect with you and learn more?
Sure. LinkedIn, same name, Kevin Thorn. Learn Nuggets on Twitter. So those are two primary. And then if you want to follow the traveling hat of Mr. Nugget Head, he's on Instagram. Mr. Nugget.
Well, that's awesome. I'll have to check that out. Good. Well, thank you so much for joining us this month, Kevin.
Thanks, Tim.
All right, that's all we have time for today. Of course, I want to thank Kevin for joining me and helping me to tackle all of those really awesome questions. And as always, a big thanks to everyone who submitted questions for this month's episode. If you happen to be watching this on YouTube and you want to get alerted when we publish our next episode of ATD Ask a Trainer, make sure to click that subscribe button below. And of course, make sure to check out the ATD Ask a Trainer advice column by clicking on the link in the description. My name is Tim Slade, and until next time, I'll see you around.